We'd like to start the Prime Minister Kishida's press conference. First, he has opening remarks. Please, Prime Minister. Yes, yesterday we have in fact concluded the laws that we have submitted, as well as in fact the Reiwa supplementary third year budget, and we have closed that session. And with all my colleagues, as well as those all concerned, I'd like to sincerely express my appreciation. And at this start session, to the extent possible, I have thoroughly explained my thoughts to municipalities, as well as I've listened to those on the front lines. And in the debate at the Diet, I have considered the voices that were expressed, as well as what I felt that needs to be changed. I have drastically politically shifted our position. And what's important is to appreciate the voices of the public or our people. For instance, handouts to households with children. In this harsh economic environment at households, in tough conditions, I guess many are striving. And to provide handouts as early as possible, I believe, is of utmost importance. Year-end, as well as the start of the new year, the national government, as well as the municipalities, of course, it will burden them. But we'd like to ask for their cooperation to benefit the public, that I'd like to ask for sincerely. In this pandemic, which is unprecedented, and we have limited visibility, and we'd like to, in fact, provide the public every sort of encouragement to get set to work, as well as to live their daily lives. We will do everything on our part, on part of the government. And for that, first, we have a drastic, large-sized economic stimulus package within this year to be delivered to the public. And at the same time, the variant of COVID-19, addressing new circumstances, we will take every cautious policy possible to be ahead of its spread. And in fact, the second administration after the general election, 40-plus days have passed. And under this policy, I believe utmost importance is the speed in which we address these matters. And of course, I will lead the charge, as I have. And by concluding or passing the supplementary budget, 78.9 or 7.89 billion, 7.89 billion, in fact, or correction, 7.89 trillion, in fact, of a budget, of supplementary budget, will be going to a stage of execution. And in fact, we are still grappling with the pandemic, and in the struggle to or against this COVID-19, we will have to thoroughly explain, as well as take swift action, which I have, in fact, thoroughly implemented. We will thoroughly explain the whole picture of the government and its administration and its thoughts to the people, as well as to effectively advance, as to actually have the highest possible resonance from the public, as well as, in fact, to actually have the best out of our public, or the national citizens, to have each and every person provide their cooperation in order to protect the lives and the assets of our people. I will do everything in my capacity. In fact, unprecedented challenges, of course, day to day we are facing challenges in this unprecedented struggle to the coronavirus. And in fact, we will unleash ourselves of the conventional wisdom. Of course, politics has a role to play to actually take bold action.
Last year, in the spring, when we had a start of the COVID-19 and the expansion of the variant, a large number of people couldn't reach masks. So therefore, as for the Japanese government, the cloth masks distribution to all citizens, and afterwards, the manufacturing and the distribution of masks resumed, and now, for the lack of masks, such concerns was alleviated and completely eradicated, so the initial intent was achieved. And later on, as for the Japanese government, 500 million or more stockpile has been secured. For emergency situations, we're in perfect shape. So financing and funding, and from efficiency perspective, the cloth, masks, and the government stockpile, and whoever wants it will receive it, and will effectively use it. And by the end of the year, there will be a discarding. Such instruction was given. And on 6th of December, I delivered a policy speech, and I talked about COVID-19 countermeasures and the policies for diplomacy and security and the economic package, etc. So I talked about the different issues and how to countermeasure. In today's speech, as I talked about, or after I delivered a policy speech, in terms of policies, and there were 7 items where we had a progress. So let me just briefly mention that area. Number 1, border control measures. Foreigners, new entry was halted, and from 29th of November for 1 month, we held such measures. However, because of the Omicron and the complication risks, and such scientific evaluation has not been established yet as of today. So therefore, we will see how it will play out during New Year's holidays and year-end period. And for the time being, we'll have decided to extend the border control measures and quarantine measures. We'd like to gather all the intelligence, heart and soul. And the third, inoculation and the oral medication. And with that in mind, we'd like to accelerate our domestic measures. Number 2, in domestic sphere, in order to contain the spread of the COVID-19, we'd like to enhance our measures. For all the positive cases domestically observed, Omicron screening will be done so that early detection will be thoroughly implemented. And on top of this, Omicron variant and close contacts. On this front, instead of waiting at home for 14 days at accommodation, they will be requested to self-isolate. So we will enhance the measures for containment. Number 3, prevention and screening and early inspection. We will have comprehensive measures in place. About the comprehensive enhanced measures, the first pillar is accelerating the vaccination program for healthcare professionals and the people with complication risks, 65 or older, and the elderly, about 31 million people. With this scope in mind, the third inoculation will be accelerated. And the second pillar is orally administered medicine to be started, and regulatory approval, and afterwards 1.6 million doses were secured for milk, and by the end of the year, we will start inoculating people, and 2 million doses of Pfizer next year. From early juncture to healthcare institutions, we will make preparations to be able to reach those institutions. And with the spread, new positive cases, we have 900,000 positive cases, out of which the people with the complication risks, according to experts' opinions, it's around 200,000 people. And as for milk, medication, 1.6 million doses. The infectivity reaching twice as much, and the midterm spread. And even with such cases, including moderate cases, there are people with complication risks, and they will be entirely covered by this dosage. And the third pillar is free of charge screening to be enhanced. First of all, the people who cannot get vaccinated and reside in scope, from the year end, free of charge screening will be conducted in all prefectures.
が増えることが
And in fact, we expect more gatherings in the year end as well as the start of the year. Avoid 3Cs as well as wash your hands, wear your masks. Basic countermeasures would need to be reminded. And in fact, as countermeasures to the Omicron variant, if you see symptoms of a cold, in fact, there are some opinions of experts that we should ask them to stay at home. Community infection still is not prevalent in Japan. However, I'd like to remind everyone to take precautions. And second, the support to those who are suffering from COVID-19 pandemic. At the end of this year, if you're anxious of how you're going to make ends meet in the new year, the early implementation of the supplementary budget, I have instructed its early execution to the ministers. For instance, 100,000 yen of a handout to students to make their ends meet, as well as to households with children. In fact, we will, from this fiscal year, try to support in every way we can extensively those households and students who are suffering. On the 28th of the December, in fact, we will have NPOs as well as private and public coming together to, in fact, avoid suicides, as well as, in fact, poverty of children, as well as try to actually provide relief to those who are suffering mentally as well. Therefore, if you have any difficulty or concerns, please speak to the municipalities as well as the NPOs for help and consultation. Other than the direct sufferings from COVID-19, we see spiking gasoline prices, as well as, in fact, the rice price declining, as well as, in fact, permastone, as well as, in fact, algae approaching the shores, providing sufferings. Are some of the sufferings, as well as we do see a drop in demand for fresh milk. Correction on part of the Prime Minister. In fact, the decline of demand for fresh milk is a major issue. In order to avoid a mass disposal of fresh milk, please have more fresh milk, consume more fresh milk, as well as also buy more dairy products. That we would like to ask for our citizens for their support as well. And on new capitalism, digital and carbon are the key words. And in this dynamic transformation that we are seeing in the society and economy, in generating new value, in fact, we will further strengthen investing in people. The national government will provide a program, and to provide support, of course, from the past, it's clear that it's reaching its limits. Therefore, from the very planning stages, we will introduce private initiative. In fact, non-regular workers, approximately 1 million workers, enhancing their capacity, as well as changing their jobs, as well as stepping up their skills, that we will support, as well as those who have been operating businesses. We will actually listen closely to all those input from extensive sources, and we will challenge that new method of creating programs. And very soon we will be actually asking for input from the public. So we do appreciate proactive proposals. And in fact, distribution is a pathway to growth. And it's at the very center and the heart of it. And by distribution, will generate new demand to support growth, to lead off to new cycle of growth. And one important pillar of distribution is wage hikes by corporations. We will take every possible measure to provide an environment or sentiment, in fact, that corporations would be willing to pay more for their employees. For that, in fact, the government will raise public approved prices as well as wages, those in nursing as well as child nursing, as well as in medical. From February, we will raise 3% as well as nursing 1% from next January, as well as from October permanently raised by 3%. And also, the corporations, if they wage hike, we in fact will ask businesses extensively to in fact be able to supplement that. And in fact, on the 27th of December, we will have a package that we will summarize for that. And from next year, March, will be a concentrating implementation period together with the Fair Trade Commission as well as the small and medium business agencies. We will actually have an extensive grasp and a system for it to identify issues.
接種は
For problematic industries, there will be on-spot inspection so that the price transfer can be conducted easily. And many SMEs are facing a rapid raw material hike for prices and energy price hikes as well. So likewise, price transfer measures will be implemented. And about wage hikes and distribution through wage hikes, instead of cost, it's investment for the future. So therefore, we have to make sure that wages are appropriately paid out. So sustainable creation of the value is going to be underpinned by doing so. And for shareholders, there has to be the right understanding of corporations, for corporations, and the people's value. As part of the disclosure of the corporate sector, there has to be a better transparency. And next year, such visualization of non-financial status will be conducted. And about the digital garden city state scheme, debate is now progressing. And within the digital committee for extraordinary administrative advisory, there will be a guidance stipulated in line with that. 400,000 bills and 40,000 ordinances will be reviewed in bulk, and next spring, the institutional change plan will be compiled. For example, through institutional design change, laws and plans, and infrastructure maintenance, regulations, and other sector or automobiles and regular maintenance and nursing care sectors. Rationalization will be conducted for people allocation, and about the digital infrastructure by March next year, maintenance plan will be established and presented. Wherever you are across the nation, autonomous driving and high speed and digital services will be conducted with low latency. So around 10 or more digital sites will be established in 5 years, and currently 30% of the population coverage. By 2023, it will be raised to 90%, and for optical fibers, by 2030, 99.9% of the households should be covered. And that way, we will address this front. So with no one left behind, all the people have to benefit with digitalization. Such society will be created. And starting with the elderly people, the people who are not versed in digital capabilities will be supported, and 10,000 people or more digital promotion officials will be allocated and deployed across the nation. And the other day, we had a dialogue, and as part of the dialogue, Aizu was visited. And corporations and the private sector and the academic sector collaborated so that the digital garden city can be, and a new era can be opened up. And together with residents, there will be a collaboration for digital social implementation in the new era. Regional revitalization and a hub will be created by deploying the right people in 100 sites across the nation about the climate change by 2030 or fiscal 2030, 46% reduction, and by 2050, carbon neutrality will be achieved. And we will stay the same in terms of this objective and climate change. In terms of a new capitalism, it has to sit in the center of this. And about the energy new basic plan, so from a supply side perspective, not only putting objectives from this area across society and industry, we have a unprecedented change, and so together with the social scheme and the landscape, we have to provide the right landscape and picture. And at early next year, new capitalism and about the climate change and how we can link them in between, we'd like to present a picture.
And number 6 on diplomacy and security. Next year, we will proactively have leaders' summits as a goal for the upcoming year. We had remote conferencing, the Summit for Democracy that I participated on, rule of law as well as respecting human rights as well as democratic values that we cherish, actions that impair them. The like-minded states will coordinate in disseminating one voice. In fact, it is still under coordination, but at the earliest date possible, I will have a leaders' summit with President Biden to further strengthen our ties, to, in fact, enhance corporations to a new level for a free and open Indo-Pacific. And the economy, our new capitalism, I will communicate my thoughts as well as President Biden, which in fact has upheld Build Back Better. We'd like to, in fact, further deepen our collaboration to lead global dialogue. And in fact, which I aim to, in fact, we will have first time in 7 years the NPT Renewal Conference, which will be the first time in 7 years to be convened in New York. In order to have this conference, which I believe is very important to be successful, we will make every effort on part of Japan, as well as based on the experience in Afghanistan. If in fact, in order Japanese people need to be transported from overseas, I have instructed that in fact the SDF Act will be renewed to transport Japanese nationals, as well as in fact we had the first deliberation council on the Constitution since I took office. And in fact, I welcome in fact this discussion being started on the redrafting or the rewriting of the Constitution, and I sincerely hope that this will lead to further advances. And as the president of the LDP, I'd like to also advance party reform. From the start of the new year, I will actually gain more input from our regional branches to further accelerate our reforms at the LDP. In fact, the credibility of statistical data as well as how public documents should be handled, various input has been provided, and I believe this is very important in advancing democracy. And also, I'd like to seek participation from legal experts. As for the double listing or posting of statistical data, I would like to examine the cause, as well as, in fact, I would like to take thorough measures in order to restore public trust in how public documents are handled and kept and stored. Actually, I will take a harsh stance in rigidly, in fact, instructing these matters to be addressed fully. And in fact, with less than 10 days to go, I will further actually rigidly handle these matters. And in fact, the regular session will open where we will have next year's budget, as well as, in fact, early passing of the laws that we have submitted, as well as, in fact, we will try our best to pass the key laws that we have submitted. And we do hope that everyone could have hope or see hope at next year further down the road. And we do sincerely ask for the cooperation of our public citizens.
それでは
Now we'd like to start taking questions from the floor. So the people who are nominated, please come to the floor, the front microphone, and state your names and affiliations, and give us one question, one by one. And first of all, we'd like to take questions from two lead media companies. Nishi Nihon Shimbun, Furukawa-san, please. I'm Furukawa from Nishi Nihon newspaper. So you just mentioned receiving voices from the people of Japan is a political mission. However, over 100,000 cash handouts, there was some confusion. So before going into the design, maybe you could have exerted your listening ability. How do you evaluate your own ability to listen to people? And going forward, with this ability, how are you going to address the risks of political changes and policy changes? About the handout that you have mentioned and the policies associated with this, after the lower house election, by the end of the year, all the support should have been delivered to all the people. With such determination, various policies and measures were arranged. And on top of that, we heeded the people's opinions and deliberations in the large session to the best possible extent. I tried to heed such opinions wherever changes were needed. As a politician, I made a bold decision. And what's important is we have to really consider the benefits and interests for the people of Japan. In order to make it happen, all the time, designs and institutions have to be changed. And amid the COVID-19 crisis situation, we have to manage the crisis and overcome it. Without a priority measure, I considered speedy execution and agile action. I'd like to prioritize such a policy going forward to move ahead with each project. And at the end of the day, it's going to benefit all the people. With such determination, I'd like to keep going.
Hasegawa-san from NHK next, please. I'm Hasegawa from NHK. As you have mentioned, border measures that you have talked about. For the time being, you will extend the current border measures. Currently, how much of an extension do you have in mind? And are you going to further reinforce these border measures at this moment? As well as on how you're going to address the Beijing Winter Olympics. There are countries, one after the other, coming up that they will not officially send delegates, official delegations, but on part of the Japanese government. How are you going to address this matter? First, on border measures, we have actually suspended entry of foreigners since the 29th of November for a month to start with. That has been in place. However, at this moment, the Omicron variant, how infectious it is, as well as what is the risk of critical conditions, at this moment have not been established yet. And thereby we will have to thoroughly make a judgment by looking what happens year-end as well as the start of the year. So at the moment we will extend the ban on the new entry of foreigners. And of course, at the moment, we will fully try to gather information the best we can, as well as domestically, we will administer the vaccination for the third time, as well as we will prepare and accelerate, in fact, the structure that would be required to, in an agile manner, address these developments going forward, as well as for all infectious cases. All of them will have to go through Omicron testing to have them actually cure themselves earlier. And also for close contacts, we will ask them to actually be at the government-designated facilities for 14 days rather than keeping themselves at home. And also on addressing the Beijing Winter Olympics on part of the Japanese government at an appropriate timing. On part of the Japanese government, the spirit as well as the purpose of the Beijing Olympic and Paralympic Games, as well as Japan's viewpoint of diplomacy. Various points will be considered in light of Japan's national interests, through which a decision will be drawn. So for the moment, we will steadily consider various circumstances in a comprehensive manner. From here, we will like to take questions from other media outlets. Please raise your hand if you have questions, and once you are asked to do so, please advance to the microphone. Koyama-san, please.
Mainichi newspaper. My name is Koyama. About 100,000 yen and equivalent handout, and pork belly was mentioned, and also fiscal consolidation was pointed out. And in June, there was a basic policy for fiscal policies and a primary balance by the end of the year. 2025 objective will be reconfirmed. However, reconfirming the objective was a target. In line with in order to confirm the target year, you're going to do verification. Is that right? About the fiscal policies. For now, COVID-19, and we are in a crisis situation, so therefore, fiscal spending, which is necessary, will be expended without reservation. We have to be imperfect measures at this current stage. So therefore, with such a determination, large economic package was arranged. And without the economy, fiscal consolidation cannot happen. So therefore, the right sequence has to be materialized, like I said before. However, recently, COVID-19 measures and economic package to be implemented, and from mid to long-term perspective, addressing long-term fiscal consolidation, this doesn't run counter to such a perspective. First of all, we have to overcome COVID crisis, and we have to resurrect our economic activities. On top of that, we'd like to consider the fiscal consolidation. In such a sequence, we'd like to address this front. That's a basic policy, and such a thinking or way of thinking. The other day was in LDP, the fiscal consolidation headquarters was established, reporting to the top person, and I attended the first session, and regarding the basic policies that I have just mentioned were discussed. And primary balance to turn around, and basic fiscal economic policies as indicated by the end of the year. The base year or the objective year, target year is going to be reconfirmed. However, so the question was it will be validated except the emergency situations happening, right? As you can see here, the target year will be discussed thoroughly by the end of this year, and necessary validation or verification will be conducted. And regarding the target year, there will be a reconfirming, such will be implemented. So this is what I can say for now.
Next question, Ikejiri-san, please. Ikejiri from Asahi Shimbun. Thank you. If I may ask again, in the session, the Moritomo alteration or falsification case, the family of Akagi-san, who used to work for the Kinki local bureau of the Ministry of Finance. In fact, the national government changed, flip-flopped its position, in fact, to pay a compensation. The filing of the family, in fact, was to have the truth revealed. In fact, the family has been appointed. Going forward, Prime Minister, do you intend not to directly address this issue, or are there plans for, in fact, having a third-party group to conduct further investigation on this point? At the courts, a filing was made according to proceedings, as well as the compensations were fully acknowledged by the government. On the 14th, I have received a report from the Ministry of Finance in admitting, in fact, or admitting on part of the government that the government is responsible for compensations. On this Moritomo issue, since I took office as Prime Minister, to the Ministry of Finance, I have instructed them to take every thorough measure to follow the court proceedings. And how it has been dealt with, including the submission of the so-called Akagi file. And to go back through all of this and reflect this, I have made 2 instructions. The first of which is this compensation filing. Separate from that, in fact, there has been, in fact, a filing for disclosure of information, and that other filing or dispute is still in place, and that needs to be thoroughly dealt with. And together, in various fora, going forward, a thorough explanation needs to be given, which I have instructed. I myself, going forward, I'd like to sincerely address this matter and to make every effort in order to fulfill accountability.
Murray-san, next. TBS, Murray, about diplomacy. You have just mentioned once again about the U.S. visit and about your summit meeting with Mr. Biden. You were willing, however, decision is being stagnated. What is the reason? What is the bottleneck? And so if no decision is made until ordinary session, are you going to consider meetings with other countries, or as a top person, are you going to prioritize the U.S. Top leader? About the U.S.-Japan alliance, it is a linchpin for our diplomacy and security. So the top person with the U.S. President, Mr. Biden, at an early juncture, I'd like to have an in-person meeting to talk about various issues. We'd like to share our understanding, thoughts, and establish personal trust relations. This is really the very important point. So from this perspective, already COP26 was held, and when on that occasion, I said at an early juncture, I'd like to have a summit meeting with President Biden. That's what I have said. And later on, coordination is ongoing. However, as for the U.S., domestic policy movements are there, political movements are there, and within the U.S., 70% of new cases are Omicron related or Omicron variant as per reports. So therefore, the variant situation has been very serious. So therefore, under such a situation, coordination will continue and is actually continuing. On a continuous basis, arrangement coordination will be conducted at the earliest possible timing. The U.S.-Japan summit meeting should be materialized. And apart from this, and as for other countries, whether or not I'm mulling such an option, first of all, Japan-U.S. summit meeting has to be realized with all out efforts. And with that, I need to consider such things. So first of all, towards the U.S.-Japan summit meeting, all out efforts have to be expanded.
Next question, Landel-san, please. I'm from Wall Street Journal Islanders. Well, if I may carry on with the primary balance. METI, in fact, Nakano-san, who is the director of the commercial division, in fact, the country, in fact, that can print its own currency. Unless it's high inflation, there is no problem by having a high fiscal overhang. On this theory, do you believe this is true or not on part of a Prime Minister? First, on fiscal matters, of course, there are various theories as well as various debates, as I understand. And I, for myself, my thoughts, as I've mentioned on previous occasions, fiscal matters, of course, are the very foundation of the credibility of a nation. And thereby, mid to long term, fiscal consolidation needs to be addressed, is how I think. And, of course, there are various debates or positions, but national bonds that are in the national currency, for instance, whatever spending or issuance that you have of government bonds, of course, is unlimited. Of course, I understand that there is a camp of that sort. However, the government does not take that position. On part of the government, that is, as I've mentioned, we should not take the wrong sequence. We first need to restore the economic activity and also need to restore fiscal consolidation. I think this pathway is important, and we should also address fiscal consolidation. Shitakubo-san, please.
中国 newspaper, Shitakubo. You just mentioned nuclear policies, and in the last session, nuclear-free society was also talked about. And you are from Hiroshima, and the Black Lane, and what is your policy about rescuing the victims for Black Lane? And TBNW's conference and observer attendance the other day from the US to Japan. Japanese government not attending as an observer. Such a request was made, and you kind of synchronized. What is the fact? And you have the ability to listen, and you are listening to different municipalities and different people. However, through observer attendance, maybe you can make it happen. I mean, you can exert your ability to listen. How do you see this? First, Black Lane lawsuit related judgment or court decision. The Hibakusha recognition and recognition policies. So for Hiroshima City, Nagasaki City of Nagasaki Prefecture, and with the health ministry, with the relevant stakeholders, there was a consultation. Actually, 2 rounds happened. And on the 8th of December, the health ministry and the council provided a basic way of thinking, and Hiroshima City, who attended the session, shared various thoughts and opinions. And as for the next round of session, the state policy will be presented. That's my understanding. Regarding this matter, hibakusha or A-bomb victims are getting older. With that in mind, at the early juncture, the next round should happen, and at latest, by early juncture of 2022, as many people as possible should be rescued. Speedy execution is a key. And about the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and conference and observer attendance, on this front, my way of thinking on this was already provided in the deliberation session of the Budget Committee about the TPNW, nuclear-free society. On this front, I think this is an important treaty for exit. However, nuclear power states, none of them have attended so far. And I experienced the foreign ministerial position for 4 years and 8 months. In order to fit the reality, the nuclear power states have to change their status. Otherwise, nothing will change. Such a recognition was owned. So therefore, as for the Japanese government, our only ally, which is the United States and the biggest nuclear power state, has to be moved. So we'd like to first make such efforts. That's going to be a very important responsibilities of the only A-bombed country. So first of all, with the U.S., trust relations have to be solidified towards a non- or nuclear-free society, and only afterwards, various activities should be considered. That's what I have been telling. And observer attendance before that, we have to take a precautious approach on this front as a Japanese government. That's my way of thinking. The other day, from the U.S., not attending in the session as an observer, such a request was made, you said? However, between the U.S. and Japan, what kind of interactions are made on this front? Regarding the conclusion, I will make sure, in terms of diplomacy, explaining myself is a common sense. However, the background or the interactions before that, I have to refrain from commenting on that because we have the counterpart and it's a common sense of diplomacy. So therefore, about the specific interactions, I will not tell you, but with the United States, close communication has to be established to have the adequate trust relations, not only at top level, but at various levels. Communication has to be pursued. This is important.
Yamamoto-san, please, next. I'm Yamamoto from TV Asahi. On Japan and China relations, the Beijing Winter Olympic Games, you are currently studying how you will address it, and next year is the 50th anniversary milestone year of the normalization of bilateral relations with China. You said that you will focus on leaders' summits next year. What is your relationship with Xi Jinping as well as with China next year? Japan-China relations. Conclusion at this moment, or if I speak first on the conclusion, there are no schedules or dates that are set for leaders' meetings between Japan and China. Nothing has been decided. Of course, it goes without saying that Japan-China relations are very important as a bilateral relationship. Towards China, freedom, democracy, as well as human rights, as well as the rule of law. We will say what needs to be said based on these fundamental values. And further, South China Seas, as well as matters that relate to Japan's national interest. In fact, we will have to say what needs to be said, which I believe is important. Having said what needs to be said, this important Japan-Sino relationship is really a matter of how it's controlled. And I believe this is very important as a Japanese national interest. Therefore, I would insist that in bilateral relations with China, we would have to say what needs to be said and at the same time try to make every effort to seek a stable relations, which I believe is important. Based on this policy, basic policy, next year, normalization of bilateral relations will mark its 50th anniversary, and how it should be marked will be a matter that needs to be addressed fully diplomatically.
Akiyama-san, please. Nihon Keizai newspaper, Akiyama. About the economic policies, I have a question. In the beginning, there was a mention of digitalization and climate change measures and growth strategies and so on. In order to make them in concrete shape, how and what is the path to make it lead to economic recovery? And GDP 600 trillion yen, such an objective was raised before by the Japanese government. What is the current state? And if that is the case, still, what is going to be the year for target achievement? First, about the growth. So far, under the Abe administration and the Suga administration, various policies and efforts were pursued. And over the past decade, when we look back, corporate governance, transformation, regulatory reform, and labor reform, and energy market reform, and social security reform were implemented with all efforts of each government. Policy efforts were expanded, and now about the growth and the distribution and the greater cycle. In order to make that happen, growth must happen. And within my administration, the growth measures should be addressed with all-out efforts. And to realize this, digitalization and green policies and worldwide economic and different transformation and human investment and startup and innovation on this front, the importance of these aspects is growing unprecedentedly. At an unprecedented level, so therefore, we have to somehow raise our domestic growth capabilities with that in mind. And market functions shouldn't be the only determinant. However, private and public sectors have to collaborate, and intangible assets investment has to be accelerated. That's going to be a key. With the external entities, with a new capitalism council, we'd like to provide such a landscape. And about the GDP 600 trillion yen, such a target, there was a question. First of all, within Japan, pre-COVID level has to be attained in terms of economic activities. We have to normalize and resurrect our economic activities. We have to dedicate our efforts for now. And of course, about the contents, of course, contents differ compared with pre-COVID. However, in terms of numbers, we have to normalize the situation to pre-COVID level and escalate our level further on. That's what has to happen.
Teshiba-san, please. I'm Teshiba from Kyoto Tsushin. Thank you. Next summer, we will have the upper house or the House of Councilors elections. What is your target number of seats as the Prime Minister for next summer's upper house elections? And if you win or reach that target number of seats, you will continue to be in power. Prime Ministers in the past have retreated as well as carried on if they lose the elections or do not reach the target seat numbers. What is your thoughts on this? How is the upcoming summer elections connected with retreat or carrying on? Next summer, we will have the upper house elections. It's still 6+ months ahead. So, talking about the target number of seats as well as what I would do if I do not reach that target number of seats, I think it is too early yet. So, about the upcoming elections, the issues that my administration needs to be addressed regarding the restoration of economic activity as well as diplomacy as well as how we're tackling COVID-19. How are we going to yield results or outcomes? I think first and foremost need to be addressed. And at an appropriate timing, perhaps I would come up with ideas of what are the target number of seats as well as whether I will retreat or carry on if that target number of seats are not reached. So first we will have to have substantial outcome, and we will have to advance policies that would resonate to the public.
Kiryu-san, please. Kaoku Shinpo. Today, Cabinet Office publicized Tsushima and the Japan Sea and the damage. And up to 190,000 people will be killed. On the other hand, the tsunami evacuation tower will be established, and that way 80% of the damages will be contained. However, under the current special measure, such a tower establishment and the financing is not backed up. And regarding the financial measures, the special measures and act has to be revised. And are you going to address this front in the next year's ordinary session? First of all, about the Japan Sea and the Tsushima ocean trench and the gigantic earthquake and the damages. On this front, there was a publication up to 190,000 or more people, 199,000 people will be killed. However, this is the worst case scenario with the largest earthquake occurring. So we have a lesson learned from the Great East Japan earthquake. So we have to protect people's livelihoods and lives. So in order to prevent damages for such earthquake, we arranged such estimations. However, what's important is upon the occurrence of the mega earthquake, we have to rightly fear the threats. So the disaster prevention, reduction, education, and facilities establishment for evacuation and disaster reduction has to be thoroughly implemented. That way, damages can be cut back substantially, and that's part of the report which was publicized this time. In order to cut back on the damages, to your point, various facilities and infrastructure will be required. And financial resources, whether or not that can be secured, was your question. But people's lives and their daily lives have to be protected. That's the very important mandate for our policies and our mission as politics. And if there is anything necessary, so even with a low revisions, there has to be such an arrangement. And what will be required in actuality, in reality? Once again, we'd like to recheck the status. However, generally speaking, I would say, like I have said before, so I've already described what I should have described. And this time there was a publication of the estimation, and based on that, the Central Council for Disaster Reduction and Working Group within that will be compiling the financial or final report so that disaster reduction measures can be implemented and necessary arrangement will be prepared going forward. And in that process, what will be required is going to be thoroughly reviewed to secure peace of mind for the people of Japan.
Kunisada-san, KISHIDA from Kyoto Shimbun. Regarding the election, the number of votes for actually increasing 10 as well as reducing 10 representations in the districts. In fact, you have Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, in fact, has revealed that we will see 10 more seats in 5 metropolitan areas, Miyagi, Shiga, as well as in Hiroshima, where you are from. In 10 prefectures, 1 seat for each prefecture will be reduced, and therefore, this gap in terms of the number of votes for 1 seat, there are voices that are raised that the rural communities will not, in fact, have enough voices to send their representatives. At the LDP, there were voices that mentioned +3 and -3. You believe that this proportion of seats should be as scheduled go ahead for the next elections for the lower house, and in fact we will see more population concentration in metropolitan areas and less in rural rural communities. What is the sense of that you have in terms of this population gap or dispersion or disparity that we may say that may develop further? Of course, there are various debates on this and views on this. The rewriting of the Constitution, for instance, with the very drafting of that, the matter of the representation of votes for a seat is a matter. I understand this perhaps debate comes from or stems from this. But on part of the government, I would say we will have to implement the current rules as well as laws in place and to take steady measures. In 2016, in fact, the House of Lower House, in fact, the establishment law for the representation, and in fact, the appropriation methodology for each prefecture has defined the Adams method in order to come up with the number of representation, and the census in 2020 will, if this applied, it will be +10 and -10. And in fact, the rezoning of districts, in fact, by June next year, the recommendation committee will have that recommendation in place, and on part of the government, based on the current law, would be to steadily implement it. And in 2016, this establishment law that was actually submitted through parliamentarians, of course, that in itself may have various positions, but on part of the government or the administration, by the posture that I've mentioned, I assume that it needs to be steadily addressed in the way that I've mentioned. 2 other questions.
Freelancer Egawa Shoko. Thank you. First, as for Chugoku newspaper and their answer, I wasn't clear. So let me check one thing, which is about the TPNWs and observer attendance issue. First of all, with the US, you'd like to solidify or establish trust relations. Why? With observer attendance, why you cannot establish relations of trust with the US? Why? If Germany can do it, then I don't think that the Prime Minister cannot do it. So how do you see this? So how Germany is building a relation of trust with the US, I'm not aware. However, as for the Japanese government, Mr. Biden himself and his presidential election, nuclear-free society will be aimed, and there was a clear statement from such a president. So therefore, trust relations with the US President, Mr. Biden, we'd like to build it so that we can move the US as well. And by creating such trust relations, the Japanese government should be able to fulfill our role. That's what I have been telling you. And as for the attendance or attending in the session as an observer, opinions are divided. And as for this front, first of all, after establishing trust relations, we should probably think about observer attendance. Like mentioned before, in-person summit meetings should be held between Mr. Biden and myself, and that's what I'm pursuing and exploring, and including what was pointed out. After trust relationships are formulated, I'd like to think about it. And on a diplomatic front, and human rights is a key and becoming more important. And your advisor, you have also somebody in charge of the international human rights, and it's a universal value which has to be respected. It's important. At the same time, if that is the case, then the domestic human rights situation in Japan has to be also reflected. And if you say something around the other countries' situation about human rights, then you might be pointed out some problem, for example, immigrations control and refugees recognition, etc. There are various points made. And apart from these different human rights issues occurring, so regarding a domestic human rights situation, what is your take? And your advisor in charge of the human rights, maybe you can also have a person in charge of domestic human rights issues as well. How do you see this? Yes, what you have pointed out is a very important point. So that's why I have set up a person in charge of human rights. It's not just for external human rights or overseas human rights. Human rights, regardless of inside or outside of the country, and it's actually close boundary and close national and close ministerial issues. So therefore, even domestic sphere and overseas sphere, sectionalism has to be broken down in order to tackle this front under the jurisdiction or leadership of a prime minister. A human rights official, high official was appointed. So I share such problems and the need to tackle such an issue. Human rights issue is quite important, and so therefore there are many difficulties ahead of us. However, while being aware of such issues, as many people as possible should also contribute. And in order to have the best progress, we'd like to expand our efforts. And one by one, I'd like to address such a front. Including domestic sphere, your advisor will also cover the domestic sphere. Yes, there are different issues tackled and covered, and including such an issue as well, I'd like him to consider the right measures.
For your last question, Nishimura-san, please. I'm from Radio France as well as from Libération. I'm Nishimura. Thank you for this opportunity. On border measures is my question. From a year and 8 months before, most of the foreign students have been banned from entry into Japan. Most of them have been banned. It's a limit for them, and we see quite a number of students abandoning the idea of studying in Japan altogether. To have a vaccine passport, as well as to have daily PCR testing, as well as to be isolated in a facility for months. You could have those strict measures. Is it altogether physically impossible to have students admitted? Of course, there are various measures that could be considered for students. However, the Omicron variant is a unprecedented risk, or is an unknown risk. After we confirm the degree of that risk, we would consider matters, but it would be only after ascertaining that unknown risk. Therefore, at this moment, we haven't confirmed the unknown risk, and therefore, we are taking the most strictest border measures amongst G7 countries because we believe being cautious above being cautious is most important at this stage. And once we see a revelation of the infections or the cases developing worldwide and how, in fact, in terms of the degree the infection is, how infectious that is, of course, there's a possibility of having experts also included in considering measures. However, at this current stage, we have to be considering the worst possible case and being as precautious as we can. And by taking these measures, we will gather information and take steady domestic measures. We will continue this policy under the current circumstances. This completes the questions. Those who have raised their questions, please send in your questions to the person in charge, and we will send them back by email. Thank you. This closes the Prime Minister's press conference today. And thank you very much for your cooperation.